April 1944, Berlin. Generalleutnant Adolf Galland, 32 years old, General der Jagdflieger, the officer personally responsible for every German fighter pilot still alive, sat with the loss returns for the first 4 months of the year. He was not a staff officer guessing at the war. He had flown 705 combat missions. He had 104 victories. He had led a fighter wing through the Battle of Britain and watched that campaign break on the same problem he was now reading about in a column of figures. More than 1,000 day fighter pilots gone since January. Not aircraft pilots, and not the new ones. The returns were thick with Staffel, Gruppe, and Geschwader commanders, the men who led the formations into contact, and the men who taught every replacement how to stay alive long enough to become useful. Galland later wrote a single sentence about that spring that has been quoted ever since. Between January and April 1944, our daytime fighter arm lost more than 1,000 pilots. They included our best Staffel, Gruppe, and Geschwader commanders. 5,000 miles away, at Foster Field, Texas, a 23-year-old from Poplar, Wisconsin, was doing something that would have been incomprehensible inside the Luftwaffe. Major Richard Bong had 28 confirmed victories. He was the leading American ace alive, and in April of 1944, the Army Air Forces pulled him out of the South Pacific and sent him to gunnery school. Not as leave, not as a reward, but as an assignment. He was there to teach. Germany was spending its best pilots. America was banking them. Within 5 months, German fighter production would reach levels Hermann Göring had promised for years and never delivered. Aircraft were not the problem. Aircraft were arriving in numbers the Luftwaffe had never seen in its history. There was simply no longer anyone who knew how to fly them. This is the story of how the Luftwaffe lost the air war over Germany, not to a better fighter, not to a secret weapon, but to a training schedule. Part 1. What the Luftwaffe believed a pilot was. To understand why the Luftwaffe could not replace its pilots, you have to understand what the Luftwaffe believed a pilot was. In 1939, the German fighter arm was arguably the finest in the world, and it had earned that reputation honestly. Its senior men had flown combat in Spain with the Condor Legion, while British and American pilots were still flying peacetime exercises. Werner Mulders had worked out the Finger 4 formation over Spanish airspace, a 4-aircraft structure so obviously superior that every air force on Earth eventually copied it, including the ones he was fighting. German doctrine treated the fighter pilot as a craftsman, skill accumulated over years. Judgment could not be rushed. A man became dangerous slowly, and once he was dangerous, he was far too valuable to remove from the front. So the Luftwaffe did not remove him. There was no tour of duty. No fixed number of missions after which a man went home to rest, to instruct, to hand on what he knew. A German fighter pilot flew until one of 4 things happened. The war ended. He was killed. He was wounded badly enough to be permanently grounded. Or he was captured. Erich Hartmann finished the war with 352 victories, more than any pilot in the history of aerial combat. He flew 1,404 combat missions to get them. He was still flying operations on the 8th of May 1945, the last day of the war in Europe. That system produced extraordinary individuals. It produced scores no Allied pilot ever approached, and it produced them because the German ace was never taken out of the fight long enough to stop scoring. But it also meant that everything those men learned stayed at the front. It never came home. Every hour a German expert spent alive was an hour spent fighting, not teaching. The knowledge was concentrated in a few hundred irreplaceable men, and it was carried entirely in their heads, above hostile territory, several times a day. When they died, it died with them. The Luftwaffe had built an air force with no memory. Part 2. The system nobody in Berlin took seriously. The United States built the exact opposite machine, and it built it out of an assumption German officers found faintly absurd, that a combat pilot was a manufactured product. Not a craftsman, a product, with a specification, a production line, and a quality standard that could be raised deliberately over time. The groundwork was laid before the shooting started. From 1939, the civilian pilot training program put basic flight instruction through American colleges on a scale no other nation attempted, and by the time it was folded into the war effort, it had given elementary training to well over 400,000 people. Not pilots, raw material. Then came the part that mattered. The Army Air Forces gave its combat pilots a fixed tour. In the 8th Air Force, it began at 25 missions, rose to 30, and by the middle of 1944 stood at 35. Complete the tour and you went home. And a large share of those survivors went straight into training command. Robert S. Johnson finished with 27 victories and was sent back to the United States. Richard Bong was sent to gunnery school with 28. The most experienced fighter pilots in the American inventory spent months of the war standing in front of 19-year-olds in Texas and Arizona and Florida, explaining exactly how the enemy flew, exactly what had nearly killed them, and exactly what to do about it. The consequence compounded quietly, year after year. The American training pipeline improved continuously because it was fed a constant supply of men who had just survived the precise thing they were being asked to teach. A pilot graduating in 1944 was learning from tactics that had been proven over Germany 4 months earlier. By 1944, a United States fighter pilot arrived at his operational squadron with somewhere in the region of 320 to 360 flying hours behind him. Across the whole war, the Army Air Forces graduated 193,440 pilots. German intelligence saw the American projections and dismissed them, exactly as it had dismissed Roosevelt's announcement in 1940 that the United States would build 50,000 aircraft a year. The figures were treated as propaganda, a democracy talking loudly to reassure itself. The figures were a schedule. Part 3. The Winter the Teachers Died. In January 1944, Lieutenant General James Doolittle took command of the 8th Air Force, and he changed one thing. Until then, American escort fighters had been chained to the bomber formations. Their job was to protect the boxes and stay with them. A sign at Fighter Command Headquarters said the first duty of 8th Air Force fighters was to bring the bombers back alive. Doolittle had it taken down. The new instruction was blunt. The mission was to destroy the German Air Force. Escorts were released to hunt, to chase German fighters down, to pursue them to their airfields, to attack them on the ground and in the landing pattern. At the same moment, the P-51 Mustang arrived in strength with drop tanks, which meant American fighters could now go anywhere the bombers went, all the way to Berlin and back. The bomber stream stopped being purely a target. They became bait. In the last week of February 1944, the Americans launched what the crews came to call Big Week. 6 days of sustained attacks on the German aircraft industry, deliberately flown to force the Luftwaffe into the air in defense of targets it could not afford to abandon. The Luftwaffe came up. It had no choice, and it was met by escorts under orders to kill fighter pilots rather than merely shield bombers. Between January and May of 1944, the German day fighter force lost 2,262 pilots. In May alone, it lost roughly a quarter of its entire fighter pilot strength. Read those figures the way Galland read them. Every dead Gruppenkommandeur was not one casualty. He was a schoolroom with no teacher in it. He was the man who would have told the next replacement how a Mustang behaves in a diving turn, how to brake, when not to. Every one of those deaths removed instruction that had not yet been given. The Americans were harvesting exactly the men the German system had never allowed to come home. Part 4. The fuel that never reached the school's honor. On the 12th of May, 1944, the 8th Air Force sent more than 900 bombers against the synthetic oil plants at Zeitz, Leuna, Brooks, Berlin, and Lützgendorf. Albert Speer understood immediately what had happened. In his report to Hitler, he wrote that the enemy had struck at one of Germany's weakest points, and that if they persisted, Germany would soon have no fuel production worth mentioning. They persisted. German aviation fuel output collapsed over the following months, from roughly 175,000 tons in April 1944 to a fraction of that figure by the autumn. Now the Luftwaffe had to choose where the remaining fuel went. It made the only decision an air force under direct attack can make. Operational units first, training schools last, and so the schedule changed. A German fighter pilot entering combat in 1942 had roughly 240 flying hours. By late 1944, replacements were arriving at operational units with something closer to 100, and some with barely 50 hours on a fighter aircraft. The American opposite number stepping onto the same battlefield had well over 300. The two lines had crossed, and they were still moving apart. What followed is the part Galland described as a fatal circle, and it is the mechanism that actually destroyed the German fighter arm. Undertrained pilots were shot down at a catastrophic rate, often on their first or second sortie, frequently before they had fired. Those losses opened more vacancies. The vacancies were filled by pilots trained even more briefly, because the fuel situation had deteriorated further. Those men died faster still. The Luftwaffe was not losing a battle of attrition. It was feeding a machine that consumed pilots faster than any training system on Earth could have replaced them, and its own training system was, by then, barely functioning. Part 5. More aircraft than men to fly them. And here is the detail that German officers could never satisfactorily explain, then or afterwards. Germany did not run out of fighters. Under Speer's reorganization, fighter production rose through 1944 to levels that would have decided the Battle of Britain outright. Output exceeded 3,000 aircraft in a single month that September. Across the year, Germany built well over 20,000 fighters. They stood at dispersal fields, dispersed under trees, camouflaged, complete, with no fuel to fly them and no qualified pilot to sit in them. The Messerschmitt 262 made the point unanswerable. It was the fastest operational fighter in the world, a genuine generational advance that Allied piston aircraft could not catch in level flight. It arrived in an air force that no longer had the trained men, or the fuel, to convert onto it in numbers that mattered. On the 1st of January 1945, the Luftwaffe gathered what remained and threw it at Allied airfields in the Low Countries, Operation Bodenplatte. Nearly 900 aircraft, most of the surviving fighter force, flown by a mixture of the last veterans and pilots, with almost no training at all. They destroyed a few hundred Allied aircraft on the ground. The Allies replaced them in weeks. The Luftwaffe lost more than 200 pilots killed, captured, or missing in a single morning, and among them was a large proportion of the formation leaders it had left. There was nothing behind them, no pipeline, no instructors, no fuel, no time. The German fighter arm did not surrender in May 1945. It had already ceased to exist as a trained force 4 months earlier. Synthesis. The Luftwaffe never lost the technology race. At the end, it held the fastest fighter, the first operational jet, and a production line outbuilding anything it had managed at the height of its power. What it lost was the argument about what a pilot is. Germany treated its best pilots as weapons, to be used continuously, at maximum effect, until they were expended. It was an entirely rational policy for a short war, and it delivered the highest individual scores in aviation history. It also guaranteed that when those men were finally killed, everything they knew disappeared with them, and there was no one left to teach the boys sent up to take their place. America treated its best pilots as teachers. It pulled them out of combat at the peak of their competence, at real cost to its own frontline strength, and made them stand in front of a blackboard. The Germans could explain the loss of an aircraft. They could count it, replace it, and did. What they could never explain was where the Americans kept finding pilots, and the reason they could not explain it is that the answer was never on a battlefield. It was in a classroom in Texas, in a decision made about how a nation spends the men who already know how to survive. If this story moved you, please hit like. It helps more people discover these forgotten WWII stories. Subscribe and turn on notifications for new videos every week. Leave a comment and tell us where you're watching from. If someone in your family served during World War II, we'd love to hear their story too. Thanks for watching and for helping keep these heroes and their stories alive.